You ever walk off a used car lot feeling like you got a great deal? Then 6 months later, you're staring at a repair bill that's bigger than what you paid for the car? It happens more than you think. And the worst part is, most of these vehicles look completely fine when you buy them. Clean Carfax, decent mileage, priced just low enough to feel like a steal. That's exactly the trap. Today we're counting down 10 cars that have a habit of draining bank accounts after the sale, and a few of these might genuinely surprise you. We're talking about a German luxury SUV that looks prestigious in the driveway but spends more time on a lift than on the road. A Japanese sedan that lures buyers in with practicality and then hits them with one of the most expensive failures a mainstream car can suffer. And a turbocharged performance model that dealers quietly love to see come back, because it always does. Some of these vehicles carry repair costs that regularly push past even $10,000 for a single job, not a collection of small problems adding up. One job. And if you don't know what you're looking at on that lot, there's a real chance you walk straight into it. We saved the worst for last. Number 1 on this list is a vehicle that experienced mechanics have a specific reaction to whenever a customer mentions buying one. It's not alarm. It's not a warning. It's something quieter than that, and somehow more unsettling. Stick around, you'll want to understand why before you sign anything. Number 10. Ford Focus Power Shift. The Ford Focus should have been one of the safest used car purchases anyone could make. For years, it ranked among the most popular compact cars in America, the United Kingdom, and much of Europe. It looked contemporary, handled well for its class, returned solid fuel economy, and could regularly be found on the used market for thousands less than Japanese alternatives. The value proposition was genuine. The car made sense on paper in almost every way. Then people started living with them. The problem had nothing to do with the engine or the suspension. It came from the transmission, specifically a unit Ford called the Power Shift. It was a dual-clutch gearbox, marketed as delivering the fuel efficiency of a manual with the convenience of an automatic. That pitch worked well in a brochure. On the road, the experience was something else entirely. Cars shuddered when pulling away from a stop. Gear changes felt jerky and unpredictable. Some drivers reported hesitation when merging into moving traffic, which is about as dangerous as automotive problems get in everyday driving. Others described violent shaking during acceleration or sudden, unexplained losses of power. And what made the whole situation genuinely frustrating was that repair after repair often failed to resolve it permanently. Clutch replacements ran between $1,500 and $3,000. More serious transmission work pushed bills well past that. Owners would leave the shop, drive the car for a few weeks, and find themselves back with the same symptoms. The real damage wasn't mechanical. It was financial and psychological. People bought the Focus specifically because it seemed like a responsible, affordable choice. Instead of saving money, they inherited a problem that had no clean ending. As frustrating as a transmission that can't be fixed is, it at least fails in a way that's visible. The next vehicle on this list has a habit of destroying itself quietly from the inside, before most owners even realize there's a problem. Number 9. Chevrolet Equinox 2.4-liter. The Chevrolet Equinox sold well because it offered families exactly what they said they wanted. Affordable pricing, practical space, comfortable everyday driving. A compact SUV that didn't require a premium badge to justify the purchase. For used buyers especially, it looked like a responsible decision, and for many owners, it was. But a specific version of the Equinox, equipped with the 2.4-liter Ecotec 4-cylinder engine, became the subject of a pattern of complaints that painted a much darker picture. The engine consumed oil, not gradually, the way older high-mileage engines sometimes do, but actively and persistently, even in relatively young vehicles. Owners began noticing they needed to add oil between scheduled changes. Some brushed it off as normal. Others started monitoring their levels more closely and became alarmed at how quickly they dropped. Here's what made this particularly dangerous. Oil consumption on its own is inconvenient. But when oil levels fall low enough and stay there, timing chains begin wearing in ways they were never designed to handle. Internal components start suffering damage that accumulates silently. There's no dramatic moment, no obvious event. Just gradual deterioration that becomes catastrophic eventually. By the time many owners discovered the full extent of the damage, the conversation had shifted from oil top-offs to complete engine replacement. Timing chain repairs alone frequently exceeded $1,000. Full engine work climbed past $5,000. A replacement engine pushed the total even higher. The pattern in owner complaints is remarkably consistent. The oil keeps disappearing. The warning lights come back. The engine starts sounding different. Then the estimate arrives and rewrites the entire financial case for the vehicle. The Equinox is a lesson in how a family-friendly reputation can coexist with a very expensive engineering problem. But if the Equinox traps buyers who were trying to be practical, the next vehicle traps an entirely different kind of buyer, one who thought they were being clever. Number 8. Audi A4 2.0 TFSI. There's a specific type of used car buyer who ends up with an Audi A4, and they're usually pretty pleased with themselves at the point of purchase. They've done the math, they know the car originally sold for significantly more. They're getting leather seats, a premium interior, capable performance, and a respected badge for a fraction of the new car price. It feels like the kind of move most people don't think to make. The problem is that a lot of people make exactly that move. And some of them discover the hard way that the original engineering assumptions built into the car haven't changed just because the price dropped. Many early 2.0 TFSI engines in the A4 developed a serious oil consumption problem rooted in piston ring failure. The rings allowed excessive oil to enter the combustion process, which meant owners were burning through oil at a rate that went well beyond anything a manufacturer would describe as acceptable. Some drivers were adding oil frequently just to keep the engine in a safe operating range. The repair required to properly address the underlying cause could run between $4,000 and $8,000. For a car that may have been purchased for not much more than that, the math became deeply uncomfortable very quickly. And that still wasn't necessarily the end of the story. Timing chain concerns on certain variants added another layer of risk, one with the potential for even larger bills if the problem progressed far enough. The vehicle that felt like a steal could quietly become one of the more expensive cars a person had ever owned. What makes the A4 situation particularly instructive is this. The purchase price dropped because the market reflected the ownership reality. Depreciation on used luxury cars is not random. It often carries information. The buyers who understood that walked away. The buyers who focused on the badge and the original price didn't. Still, the A4's problems are at least diagnosable. There's a known cause and a known fix, even if that fix is expensive. The next vehicle presents something harder to deal with. Problems that arrive in waves, without a clear pattern, and never seem to fully resolve. Number 7. Mini Cooper S. The Mini Cooper S does something very few cars can do. It makes people feel something before they even sit in it. The styling is distinctive. The brand carries genuine personality, and behind the wheel, even briefly, it delivers an experience that most cars in this price range simply can't match. It's genuinely fun to drive, and that enthusiasm tends to cloud judgment at a critical moment. Here's what a short test drive doesn't reveal. Many turbocharged Mini Cooper S models from this era developed a reputation for reliability issues that could attack from multiple directions simultaneously. Timing chains, turbochargers, cooling systems, and carbon buildup each carried their own repair costs and their own timelines. The timing chain issue became particularly well documented. Owners would notice a faint rattle from the engine compartment, a sound easy to dismiss the first time you hear it. Mechanics who've worked on these cars know that sound often marks the beginning of an expensive chapter. Timing chain repairs could run several $1,000s. Turbocharger replacement added thousands more. And if the timing chain issue was allowed to progress to the point of engine damage, the estimate could approach or exceed what the car was worth. The cruelest part of the Mini ownership experience is the gap between appearance and reality. These cars often look fantastic even when they're in poor mechanical shape. The paint holds well, the interior still feels premium. A 10-minute test drive can feel completely normal. The problems tend to emerge gradually, over weeks and months, long after the purchase is complete and the enthusiasm has been replaced by something else. For some owners, it becomes a cycle that requires a deliberate decision to escape. and escaping usually means absorbing a loss. The Mini earns its spot here because it weaponizes emotion in the buying process more effectively than almost anything else on this list. But from number 6 onward, the vehicles become less about enthusiasm and more about something else. The kind of confidence that comes from an established reputation, which turns out to be equally dangerous. Number 6. Jeep Grand Cherokee. The Jeep Grand Cherokee occupies a specific and powerful position in the used market. It looks the part. The capability is real. The interior punches above its price point at certain trim levels, and the brand carries decades of association with durability and adventure that creates a kind of halo effect on the lot. The problem is that reputation was built on older, simpler vehicles. Some more recent generations of the Grand Cherokee are complicated in ways that create serious ownership exposure. Certain model years became known for electrical and mechanical issues that varied in type but not in frequency. Owners reported vehicles refusing to start without warning. Electronic systems behaving in ways that had no obvious diagnosis. Dashboard warning lights cycling on and off with no clear explanation. Power accessories failing in sequence. And the range of problems made it genuinely difficult to predict what would need attention next, or when. One of the most documented failure points was the totally integrated power module, commonly referred to as the TIP-M. When this component failed, the effects spread throughout the vehicle's electrical architecture. Lights, starting systems, fuel pumps, accessories. A single failed module could trigger a list of symptoms that looked like multiple independent problems. Replacement typically ran over $1,000, and that was before addressing whatever else the diagnostic turned up. Air suspension failures in equipped models pushed repair bills into several $1,000s. Transmission work added more. And because the problems rarely arrived alone, owners often found themselves authorizing a series of repairs rather than a single fix. What makes the Grand Cherokee particularly difficult to avoid on a used lot is that it presents well. The body ages gracefully. Used examples are priced attractively. The reputation provides reassurance that proves harder to rely on than buyers expect. From this point in the list, the vehicles shift into a different category. The first 6 entries can be painful. The next 5 have the potential to be genuinely destructive to a household budget. Number 5. Nissan Altima CVT. The Nissan Altima is the kind of used car recommendation that feels obvious. It's everywhere. Insurance costs are low. Parts availability is good. The depreciation curve makes used examples look like strong value. For a buyer trying to make a sensible decision, the Altima checks every logical box. That's what makes what happens next so difficult for many owners to process. The continuously variable transmission fitted to a significant number of Altimas from this era became one of the more well-documented failure stories in the mainstream sedan segment. Unlike a conventional automatic, a CVT operates through a belt and pulley system that doesn't shift in the traditional sense. When it works, it delivers smooth, efficient power delivery. When it fails, it tends to fail completely, and the early warning signs are easy to misread. A hesitation during acceleration, a shudder at highway speeds, the engine revving higher than expected without a corresponding increase in speed. These symptoms often appeared gradually, and many owners initially attributed them to minor issues or driving conditions before the situation made the real problem impossible to ignore. Some experienced sudden power loss. Others dealt with overheating events. Many faced complete transmission failure at mileage figures that would be unremarkable for most other vehicles. And the economics of the repair made the situation genuinely difficult. Rebuilding these units was often impractical. Replacement was the standard recommendation. That replacement regularly cost between $4,000 and $8,000. A moment worth sitting with. A vehicle purchased for $8,000 to $10,000. A transmission replacement consuming half or more of that value. Not because of neglect or misuse, but because of a known design vulnerability that the mileage finally caught up with. The Altima earns its place in the top 5 because it's a trap built from the materials of a sensible decision. Everything about the purchase makes sense. The failure arrives later, and by then, there's no obvious exit. The top 4 vehicles on this list operate on a different financial scale entirely. Because starting now, we're talking about repair bills that don't just hurt. They can make experienced car people wince. Number 4. Range Rover Sport. Understanding why so many people end up with a used Range Rover Sport requires understanding something about how human psychology interacts with depreciation. When a vehicle like this was new, it occupied a specific position in the market. It was expensive, it was aspirational. The people who bought them understood that premium ownership came with premium costs, and they were prepared for that. The build quality, the ride quality, the capability, and the interior appointments justified the price point for buyers operating at that level. Then the depreciation begins. Over 3, 4, 5 years, these vehicles can lose a staggering percentage of their original value. A Range Rover Sport that left a dealership at $60,000 or $70,000 can appear on the used market at $15,000 or $20,000. And for a buyer at that budget, the vehicle represents something almost impossible to replicate at that price. The luxury is real, the capability is real, the prestige is real. What that buyer often doesn't immediately account for is that the engineering underneath them was designed, maintained, and priced for a $60,000 vehicle. That hasn't changed. Only the transaction price has. Air suspension failures are among the most commonly reported issues. When these systems fail, they don't do so cheaply. Repairs routinely run into several $1,000s. Electrical module failures add complexity and cost before a wrench has been turned. Cooling system problems, transfer case concerns, and a general pattern of expensive component failures follow owners through the life of the vehicle with a consistency that becomes difficult to ignore. What's particularly costly about the Range Rover Sport experience is the diagnostic phase. Because these vehicles are so electronically complex, identifying the source of a problem often requires specialized equipment and significant labor time. Owners sometimes spend hundreds of dollars just to learn what the actual repair will cost. The vehicle that looks like a breakthrough purchase at $15,000 has a way of accumulating $20,000 or $25,000 in repairs over the following years. The depreciation absorbed by the first owner turns out to have been a signal, not an opportunity. The top 3 vehicles on this list take everything described above and add another dimension entirely. Because the Range Rover's problems, while expensive, at least follow a recognizable pattern. What comes next is harder to prepare for. Number 3. BMW 750i. There's a ceiling on how emotionally compelling a used Range Rover can be. It's an aspirational vehicle, but it doesn't carry the same weight as a flagship luxury sedan from a manufacturer that has spent decades building a reputation for performance and refinement at the highest level. That's what makes the BMW 750i different and more dangerous. When this car was new, it represented BMW's answer to the question of what the absolute best version of their product could be: the technology, the performance, the interior quality. The N63 twin-turbocharged V8 under the hood, producing numbers that made the price feel almost justified. These weren't ordinary cars, they were statements. Today, many examples sit on used lots and independent dealer forecourts at prices that look almost absurd, given what the vehicle originally was. And that gap between original cost and current price is where the trap is set. The N63 engine that made this car so impressive developed a reputation that became impossible for BMW to ignore. Excessive oil consumption was the most frequently cited complaint, but it was rarely the only one. Valve stem seal deterioration allowed oil to enter the combustion chambers in ways that accelerated wear throughout the engine. Turbocharger failures arrived, sometimes in pairs, since the engine runs 2. Cooling system vulnerabilities created their own category of problems. And timing chain wear added a failure mode that carried worst-case scenarios involving major internal engine damage. BMW eventually introduced a service program acknowledging some of these issues. That acknowledgement is meaningful in both directions. It confirmed the problems were real and systemic. It also meant that the vehicles affected were widely known and widely available on the used market. Replacing both turbochargers on an N63 can cost several $1,000s. That's before addressing oil consumption, before timing chain work, before any of the supporting systems that tend to need attention on a high-mileage luxury flagship. Some owners have described receiving estimates that exceeded the current market value of the vehicle, not combined across multiple visits, a single estimate for work the car required. The 750i belongs in the top 3 because it demonstrates something important about how luxury depreciation works. The price dropped because the market understood the ownership reality. The engineering complexity that made the car exceptional when new became a financial liability as components aged. The buyer who understands this can make an informed decision. The buyer who only sees the badge and the price rarely does. But even with all of that, there is a vehicle on this list that makes the 750i look manageable by comparison. Number 2. BMW X5 N63 V8. If the 750i is a cautionary tale about flagship sedan ownership, the X5 with the N63 engine is the same story told with more characters, more complexity, and a higher ceiling on what repairs can ultimately cost. Everything problematic about the N63 engine carries over from the sedan. The oil consumption, the valve stem seal issues, the turbocharger vulnerabilities, the timing chain concerns. None of that changed when the engine moved into an SUV application, but the SUV context added dimensions that made everything more expensive. Access is one of them. Modern luxury SUVs are engineered for performance and refinement, not serviceability. Reaching components that need attention often requires removing other components first, and that labor accumulates quickly. A job that might take a technician 4 hours in a simpler vehicle can take twice that in a tightly packaged luxury SUV. Every additional hour is reflected in the invoice. The X5 also attracts a specific buyer profile. Families looking for something practical enough for daily use, capable enough for occasional demands, and impressive enough to reflect a certain level of success. The used market offers examples that satisfy all three criteria at a price point that feels rational. The SUV body is genuinely useful. The interior remains impressive even on older examples. The performance is real. Then the ownership experience begins to accumulate. Turbocharger replacement on this vehicle can reach 5 figures when both units are addressed simultaneously, which they often need to be. Timing chain repairs run into thousands more. Cooling system failures, oil leaks, and electrical faults create a sequence of shop visits that owners describe with a specific kind of exhaustion. Not anger, exactly. More like the fatigue of a situation that keeps presenting new problems without ever feeling resolved. What makes the X5 particularly difficult to escape once ownership has begun is the sunk cost reality. By the time the full picture of the vehicle's needs becomes clear, a meaningful amount of money has often already been spent. Walking away means absorbing that loss. Continuing means authorizing more work. Neither option is comfortable, and neither was visible at the point of purchase. There is one vehicle remaining on this list, and the reason it sits above both BMWs, above the Range Rover, above every other entry, is not because it has a single catastrophic flaw worse than anything described so far. It's because it doesn't have one flaw. It has many, and it packages them in the most persuasive wrapper on the entire list. Number 1. Jaguar XF and Jaguar XJ. Before the reveal, it's worth pausing for a moment to understand the specific way this vehicle sets its trap. Every vehicle on this list has a version of the same story. A car that looks like value, costs that arrive later and hurt. But most of them advertise their risk to anyone willing to look. The Ford Focus has documented transmission complaints. The BMW N63 engine has a known reputation. The Range Rover's ownership costs are genuinely famous. A buyer who does even basic research before signing has access to the information needed to make an informed choice. The Jaguar is different, not because it hides its issues more cleverly, but it creates an emotional experience at the point of purchase that is more powerful than almost any other vehicle at this price level. And that emotion, more than any mechanical deficiency, is what makes it the most dangerous used car purchase on this list. Walk up to a used Jaguar XF or XJ with an open mind and describe what you see. A sedan with genuine visual presence. An interior that combines leather, wood, and metal in a way that still feels considered and premium years after production. A vehicle that competed directly with BMW's 5 and 7 Series, with Mercedes E and S Class, with Audi's A6 and A8, at prices reflecting that ambition. Now available at a fraction of that cost. For many buyers, the feeling is unmistakable. This is a car worth significantly more than what's being asked. That perception is not entirely wrong. The original engineering, The craftsmanship, the materials, the design, these are genuinely impressive. The price dropped because the market collectively and accurately factored in what ownership would require. The buyer who feels like they've found something the market missed has, in fact, found exactly what the market correctly priced. The first problems most owners encounter are with the electronics. These vehicles were built with sophisticated systems across every domain: comfort, performance, safety, driver assistance, connectivity. When everything functions as intended, the experience justifies everything the brand ever claimed about itself. When something stops working, the diagnostic process alone can cost serious money. Owners describe warning lights that appear and vanish without explanation, modules that malfunction in ways that affect seemingly unrelated systems, electrical gremlins that resist diagnosis across multiple shop visits. The suspension introduces a second category of risk: advanced systems designed for ride quality and refinement that carry significant repair costs when components fail. Air suspension repairs regularly run into several $1,000s on their own, and they rarely arrive at a convenient moment or in isolation from other issues. Cooling system failures represent a third. What begins as a minor concern can escalate if ignored. And on a vehicle with this level of complexity, the escalation path is rarely inexpensive. Then there are timing chain concerns on certain engines, and anyone who followed the earlier entries on this list already understands what that phrase tends to mean for a final repair estimate. But here is what separates the Jaguar from everything else discussed today. The other vehicles on this list have a primary failure, one central weakness that defines the ownership risk. When you research them, that weakness surfaces quickly. Buyers who discover it can decide whether they're willing to accept the risk, budget for the repair, or walk away. The Jaguar's defining characteristic is that it has no single primary failure. It fails across multiple systems in multiple ways with no predictable sequence. A suspension repair is followed by an electrical issue. The electrical issue is followed by a cooling concern. The cooling concern is followed by another warning light that requires diagnosis before it can even be categorized. Each individual problem, taken alone, might seem manageable. The accumulation is what destroys the financial case for ownership. Experienced mechanics understand something about these vehicles that most buyers discover too late. When a complex luxury car ages past a certain point, the cost of maintaining it at an acceptable standard can exceed the total value of the vehicle annually. The car requires expenditure not to improve or upgrade it, but simply to keep it functional. That's a different category of financial exposure than anything else on this list. A buyer sees a $10,000 luxury car. A mechanic sees repair costs that still reflect $70,000 engineering, applied to a vehicle whose value has long since departed. That gap between what the vehicle costs to buy and what it costs to own is the widest on this list. And it's why the Jaguar XF and Jaguar XJ sit at the top. Not because every owner has a catastrophic experience, not because the cars are without genuine merit, but because no other vehicle on this list creates such a precise and effective combination of temptation, complexity, depreciation, and ongoing financial exposure. The price makes the purchase feel obvious. The ownership makes the mistake feel equally obvious, just later. That pattern, compelling at purchase, painful in ownership, is the thread running through every vehicle on this list. The cheapest car to buy is rarely the cheapest car to own. That's not a complicated insight, but it's one that becomes expensive to learn firsthand. Depreciation is information. When a vehicle loses value faster than comparable alternatives, the market is usually communicating something about what ownership requires. The buyers who treat that signal as an opportunity tend to discover why it existed. A transmission failure costs the same whether the car is worth $12,000 or was worth $30,000. A turbocharger doesn't adjust its price because the vehicle has aged. Luxury engineering remains expensive to service regardless of how far the transaction price has fallen. The smartest question in used car buying isn't whether you can afford to purchase the vehicle. It's whether you can afford to own it. Those are two different calculations, and for every car on this list, the second one is the one that matters. Now, one genuine question worth putting to anyone who made it through this entire list. Which entry surprised you most? The Jaguar at the top is a common answer, but a lot of people are caught off guard by the Altima and the Equinox, the vehicles that are supposed to be the safe choices. If there's a car you think belongs on this list that didn't make it, the comments are a reasonable place for that conversation. The focus here is on separating vehicles worth your money from the ones that only appear to be, and on surfacing the ownership costs that rarely come up during a sales conversation. Because the best used car purchase isn't the one with the most impressive sticker for the price. It's the one you're still glad you made 2 years later. If there's one thing every vehicle on this list proves, it's that the cheapest vehicle to buy is rarely the cheapest vehicle to own. A low price tag can save you money on day one. The wrong vehicle can spend years taking it back. If you enjoy learning which vehicles are worth your money, which ones to avoid, and how to make smarter buying decisions before signing the paperwork, you'll probably enjoy what's coming next. And before you go, which vehicle on this list surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, buy smart and drive something you'll still be happy with long after the excitement of the purchase wears off.